I feel that the minorities understand the plight of what the Jews are going through much more, and they are much more sensitive than anyone else. The two gay people that are on council, I have to tell you, they are the most supportive people on the city council that I've met, which is so interesting. You would
And
never
they can
think.
be allies.
You never think that. And the two Black members also, they have, and they are still going through, discrimination.
This is Women's Gallery, the podcast where we showcase women defining Jewish leadership today. My name is Joanne Greenaway, and each episode I interview one incredible female leader, making a mark in her own way on the Jewish community. We explore different models of leadership in the context of schools, shuls, universities, batei din, and this week we are moving into the world of politics. So I am really delighted to welcome Michele Weiss to this podcast, to Women's Gallery. Welcome, Michele. It's really exciting to have you. And I think especially to talk about the political world in a week where the Jewish world is reeling from the horrific attack in Bondi Beach just yesterday, as it happens in Sydney. And, it is a really difficult moment in Jewish history. And it's a difficult moment, I imagine, to be in politics, but a really important one. So, with that in mind, I thank you in advance for the work that you're doing. I know you're really taking office in January, but just to give you a bit more of a formal introduction for our listeners' benefit, Michele has grown up and lives in Ohio in the Midwest of the United States. She has just been elected to be mayor of University Heights starting this month. University Heights, for those who don't know, it is a suburb of Cleveland with the largest concentration of Orthodox Jews in Ohio. She is the first Orthodox woman to take on an elected municipal role in the United States. And she's already been vice mayor 3 times, so she is not new to this world. But she is also an accountant by trade. She is the CFO of the largest Jewish day school in Ohio. She has an MBA. She's also been involved in the communal world as a board member and having founded a nonprofit called the AMATZ Initiative, which is a little bit more connected to the work that we do at LSJS, where it provides professional development for school principals. And perhaps we can hear a little bit more about that later. So she's both a long-time political activist and an experienced, seasoned political operator, but she's also a long-time community builder. So for both of those reasons, it's really an honor and a privilege to have you with me.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity.
So, Michele, you are the first woman that I've interviewed in a kind of political role. And I really wanted to explore that today as a vehicle for Jewish leadership, because on Women's Gallery, we look at Jewish leadership through lots of different lenses, and we try and showcase different pathways for women to get involved and to make their mark on the community. But I wanted to start really by asking what I suppose is a facetious question, but whether politics is a job for a nice Jewish girl.
I definitely think it is an opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem. You definitely have to put boundaries up. But I do feel that women in particular can multitask, and if they want to be involved, they can do it amazingly. You always just want to make sure your family is first. I always say that. I didn't start this until my kids were older. But some
What ages are they now?
So Baruch Hashem, they're all married. So
wow.
my youngest is 24.
Okay, very nice.
So, everyone's kind of out of the house, and now I have more time, but my youngest was 14 when I started. So again, I think there's also any woman who wants to go into this needs to make sure that they can kind of flex and be able to speak to the secular population as well as the Jewish population, because you can't be successful without that. So they always have to keep in mind that, this is not only about the Jews, this is about the entire community. I definitely think it's possible. I hope that I can empower young women to be able to do this, but with that, lens of you are a Jewish, woman that needs to make sure she sets an example for everybody else.
Right. And I'm sure it's an important skill to be able to talk to people outside of your own bubble, although I'm sure the Jewish community want to claim you and think you're really secretly only theirs. But tell us a little bit about your Jewish background. I'm trying to understand how you got into this and whether this was always something that you could see yourself doing, whether this has always been the kind of leadership path that you wanted, or if there was perhaps a certain moment where you decided that this was the kind of work that you felt was important and almost like a fork in the road type of moment.
But, I don't think I ever kind of envisioned this. I think, Hashem, God kind of led me, to where I am right now. I grew up in a very traditional home, not Orthodox. And I went to public school. I became religious through NCSY, which is a youth group in the United States. Actually, they're around the world now. I did have leadership positions in NCSY. Everything kind of, if you look in retrospect, kind of prepares you for these moments. But I actually, started keeping Shabbos, the Sabbath, in 10th grade. And from there, I went to Israel for seminary. I came back, I got married. I went to college while I got married my sophomore year of college, and, I finished, had my children, one during college and then, subsequently after. But yeah, at this point I've been religious more than I've not been, way more. So, but that my upbringing was, again, I was very fortunate that I went to what we have in America, Hebrew school and Sunday school. So I had a foundation at least going forward, which made it much easier becoming religious.
But connecting your Jewishness then into your career choice, was it a factor for you?
I always have that, I kind of call it the God lens, at the forefront, right? So I always know that when I'm in the public, I'm on display. Jews always have to keep that in mind whenever they are, to set that example, as we spoke about before. So that was something that's always, that I've always, in any, either professional or personal kind of experience has made sure that, I was a positive example.
Mm. What about the flip side? And I'm thinking about the more difficult Jewish experiences that many people are having right now. And as I said, this moment in history, which is such a challenging one for the Jewish people, and everyone's looking to find how they can play their part or responding differently, but trying to step up in some way. And I know that you've already had challenging moments. I read that you've had some, like the current incumbent tried to block you from certain spaces. I don't know if you perceive that to be anti-Semitic, but there's certainly been an awakening in the UK, and I know in the States as well, awakening from this complacency and a feeling that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are so much more prevalent than we had ever really acknowledged. Do you feel that you've had pushback for being a Jew in this role? Does it make the job more difficult? Are there obstacles that it puts in your path?
I think most people are good. I really do. I think there's a lot of bad actors with very loud voices, and that's kind of what I was up against. I think it was a combination of being Jewish, but at the same time being a woman, which you think is like, wow, it's 2025, like, but it's still, there is this issue. And I really never thought about it and never encountered it except for the last few years about being a woman. I'm very respectful of, when I'm in a religious organization, I know my place very well. I'm respected, but, I know that sensitivity there, but in a non-Jewish world, that should not be happening anymore in terms of women in leadership roles. And, also in the religious world, there's a place for us. And, there's been very subtle anti-Semitic rhetoric from the current administration, that I've had to deal with.
At local level.
At the local level, yeah. And it's something that I'm aware of. We are very fortunate in Cleveland that we have an excellent Jewish Federation, which has their own security force that work very closely with the municipal security forces. And I'm very close to our police chief, which is something that I never take for granted, because he is very much on the same wavelength. And since we have such a large Jewish population where I live, his whole force is very aware. You can never be too careful now. It's very, very scary. Just yesterday I was having a conversation with him saying, how do we increase security at City Hall? And it's a crazy thing to think about, but all of our schools are basically locked down with gates and buzzards and policemen, at least in America they are. I don't know how it is in the
In
UK,
the UK
but
also.
like, and non-Jewish people are like, I don't understand, why do you have to do this? Like, I've had people come to me and ask me this. I'm like, do you know how many threats have been caught because we have been so diligent? And imagine the ones that have gotten through, horribly, but
Are they armed in the US, your security in high schools? Because we
yeah,
have a lot of security we have for many, many years, but it's not armed in the way that I imagine it is in the States, or I understand it to be.
no, they're armed. They're all off-duty police officers. Yes, they are armed. And it's just it's a crazy world we're living in, and because of that, and because I'm Jewish, because I'm a woman, I do feel that there needs to be increased security in City Hall also. But just in general, I think sometimes people honestly are just ignorant also. They don't realize what they're saying is anti-Semitic. Some people definitely do. I mean, it's very obvious. But I think a lot of people are just not educated, and that's something that I want to unify our city and get that education going. I want to have a series of seminars, not just talking about the Jewish culture, but other cultures. We have 17 ethnicities where I live, which is crazy for such a small city. And I think if people have civil discourse and can really ask the questions that they want to, and it's all respectful, I think that comes a long way.
I'm so happy to hear that you're pushing through it and that you have support, because you're right, these things, there are, as a woman we have a double barrier and another obstacle and another glass ceiling to crack, and there has still not been a female president of the United States, right? Whereas I grew up under Margaret Thatcher, it was a possibility. So we need women to just not feel the setbacks, but to fight through them. And yeah, good for you, but it isn't easy, and I guess you have to be broad-shouldered and tough to some extent to weather those kind of aggressions.
And I also think, at least in America, you have two extremes of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And right now they are very loud and very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. To me, anti-Israel at this point is anti-Semitic. I mean, it doesn't, it doesn't make sense at this point. So I really feel that we have to combat that as well, which is something that's going to be very difficult. But like, this is the first election that Democrats and Republicans were pitted against each. It was a very difficult election.
You tuned out, it was silent just for a second. I'm sorry. Your last.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying that this was the first election where Democrats and Republicans were pitted against each other. I'm in a nonpartisan city, so that was kind of an interesting but very sad kind of distraction on what's been happening, and it's trickling down to local elections when it really should be staying out of it.
Yeah, look, I think that this moment in the political spectrum is so polarized, and that's such a complex thing to deal with, but that is only getting more and more entrenched. And this isn't only a US phenomenon, as we know, it's all around the world, but the US, I think, is particularly bad. And you've talked about the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats, and the extremes, and how problematic they both are for the Jewish people right now. But I want to ask specifically about the Republicans, because even though I know you do a lot of bipartisan work and cross-party work, you sit on the Republican side. And so whilst you don't speak for every Republican, we've been hearing a lot recently about toxic influences on the far right, and the anti-Semitic undertones there. And I'm thinking particularly about what was in the press a lot a few weeks ago, which was that interview that Tucker Carlson did with Nick Fuentes, who is an out far right anti-Semite. And it seems to be normalizing this kind of populist rhetoric. So I don't know if you would own that on behalf of the Republican Party, but I'm interested to explore, like, what do you say to Jews who are concerned about this toxic narrative and that becoming really entrenched within the Republican Party?
Well, you have to counter that by saying what's on the left also, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
far left progressives are just as bad as the far right Republicans. So everyone has to take responsibility for that. And the goal really is that everybody needs to come back to the middle and really be those moderate Democrats and Republicans that can come together and talk and compromise and come to consensus, because that's the only way that anything is going to get done.
Is that realistic in the United States, where it's always Republican versus Democrat and people are so tribal? Like, how do you form that center ground?
You know, in my small microcosm of my city of 15,000 people, I sit on a city council where everyone is moderate.
Right.
I'm the only Republican. It's very interesting. And I really see that when you can talk to somebody, not everything is going to be perfect, but on those big issues like hate, on those big issues like, you know, rights of certain demographics, you can understand each other. And um, I I do feel that everyone needs to move more toward the center to be able to move forward. You know, it's very scary right now nationally. I mean, I don't know how you get back to that. I could tell you what you can do on a local level. I can't tell you what you can do on a national level.
Right.
You
But
need
in a way, maybe modeling that at local level hundreds and thousands of times is the way to achieve it at national level. It's really important. It's kind of a grassroots
right.
initiative. And I think the same is playing out in Israel. There are lots of initiatives to try and strengthen the center and to form a new kind of coalition and to try and bring back voices of moderation.
Yeah,
Like I'm with you on that.
that's the only way that seems that really works. And it did. If you look back in America, you know, you look back 30 years, you didn't have these crazy extremes that were the loudest
Mm-hmm.
voices in the room.
Mm-hmm. And what about the moment where we have Donald Trump as president? And I'm thinking about you. Obviously, you kind of work cross party, but Donald Trump's been such a huge figure for Israel recently, and has been so lauded as helping to bring about this ceasefire and by the hostage families as well. Like really amazing. And I think what we've seen is a lot of people who might not otherwise support him or might not support him domestically have supported his or have appreciated his love and his big warm hug that he's given to Israel. And I don't know if that's dissipating, and there seems to be concerns that it is, or perhaps because of the far right influence and that kind of narrative getting stronger. But I wonder whether what you think going forward in terms of Israel and Trump, and whether his support can be taken for granted. You know, whether we should continue to put that above some of the concerns people have about his character and some aspects of his politics. Like, can we separate the two?
Yeah. So listen, I'm going to be the first one to say we need a president that's presidential again. We have not had that, you know, in the last bunch of years. And I can't tell you that, you know, Donald Trump's rhetoric is something that I appreciate, because I don't. I voted for Donald Trump because I knew that he would be best for Israel. And I'll give you a very interesting example. So I'm part of the Cleveland Jewish Federation's Community Relationship Committee, and I am one of the very few Republicans. I'm talking about the group is probably 50, and there might be 3 of us or 4 of us. And I'm pretty involved in it. And we had a dialogue about, they had kind of in a fishbowl, you know, I was the Republican, and then there was another Republican with me, and then they had the same kind of fishbowl with Democrats. And the thing that I said at that point, and remember, we still had, you know, the hostages, you know, please God, the last hostage should come home. But we still had the majority of the hostages there. And I said, the only reason I am voting for Donald Trump right now is because of Israel. And people were like shocked. And I didn't stray from that. That was literally, singularly my only goal. And I had somebody who is so left come up to me just the last month. And she said, you know, Michele, I think about what you said. I don't know if the hostages would have been released under a different president.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I didn't know that I made such a impression on that person, but I knew that that was my most important policy before, you know, like anything else, taxes and you know, anything else. That was the only thing that I was focused on. So I think every president kind of comes with the good and bad. You're not gonna agree with everything that any president has to say. Policy wise, I think he has a lot of good policies going forward. But again, the way that he implements them,
Yeah.
with his rhetoric is not necessarily the thing that you
Yeah.
want to do. I also feel that, Israel needs to be Israel. And yes, they needed the president to help with that whole hostage negotiation deal, but they can't rely on the U.S. to make their own peace, and they can't rely on the U.S. to rebuild, Gaza, however that's going to be.
Mm.
So Israel needs to stay true to themselves,
Yeah.
and they can't be pressured. And I don't know, it's so complicated.
Well, I think they'd like to get back to relying on the US to push forward with the Abraham Accords, which was really like the big prize in all of this. So let's see. But in the meantime, look, I think I appreciate your honesty, and I think that we will have competing priorities and competing like intersectional identities. And I think particularly for women, the attitudes for women that I hear expressed by him I really struggle with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure there's an answer to that question.
Right. And then you also, at that critical time with America, like, was Kamala Harris. Also, like,
Right.
was she but I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm not this, savvy national politician, but I could tell you that during this last election, Israel is my only priority.
Yeah, I hear that, and I'm not asking you to speak for him. I'm interested in you and your remit. So maybe share with us a little bit about your day to day. What are the kind of key priorities that you're trying to achieve or will be achieving when you start as mayor in any moment now?
So,
depending on when this is released, I think it might be the week of. So yes, Mazel Tov, and what are you hoping to achieve?
So unfortunately, like I mentioned before, this was a really tough election with Democrats getting pitted against Republicans. That's what my opponent really focused on, and because that was their only platform, they had nothing else. This was the first election I've ever had doors slammed in my face, and this is my fourth election. So I've been walking door to door. This is 4 different times. I've never had such antagonistic behavior ever, and it's all because of the national political scene in America right now. And it's so sad. I had people come up to me, I'm not even exaggerating. Are you going to bring ice into the city? And I'm like, I'm like, no, I'm not going to be bringing ice into the city. And frankly, University Heights is not going to be asked if ice is going to come in or not. But like, they were truly terrified because of, kind of could be disinformation of what's going on, on the national front. But I really feel that
just for those outside the United States, ICE is the immigration authorities, right?
Yeah,
who deport people. Okay.
Yeah. I really feel that unification needs to happen in our city. And we had some Jewish issues also that the last couple of years have kind of made this even more difficult. We have a lot of Jewish people moving here. And because of that, there is a culture of having houses of worship in homes as opposed to a proper building. And those have kind of been popping up. And, a lot of the non-Jewish community members really don't understand that. And then there was one, issue that turned into a lawsuit. So we're talking about those subtle anti-Semitic kinds of issues that are happening, plus just the whole Republican and Democrat piece. So I really want, like I mentioned before, kind of a series of discoveries where we could have different cultures come in and speak in a public forum. And then we have the typical kind of city things. I need to build new facilities. We have roads, we have infrastructure, we have sidewalks. All these things, need to kind of, happen, within our means. We had a mayor that was very toxic the last bunch of years, and I need to kind of heal the directors as well. I never really say this before, but I really think they went through trauma. Like when you are afraid of your boss and you're just trying to make it through, that's something that I need to make sure that the culture of the city and their employees is one of respect and one of not being afraid to say, what you feel should be done, having an open door policy, not being afraid that you're going to get yelled at, things like that. So
sounds like there's a lot on your desk on day one, but like an interesting mix of different issues and
yeah,
general issues and then issues of benefit for the Jewish community. But I'm thinking that it's a really powerful thing to do to have a Jewish leader who's leading on interfaith initiatives or initiatives that cut across the diversity of the city. And I'm a little bit involved in some interfaith initiatives that have started in the wake of October the 7th, but I wonder how successful you think they've been, because so many people are disillusioned by getting involved. And you're not only talking about the religious leadership level, you're talking about generally across communal initiatives across different religions. Are those very challenging spaces since October the 7th where you are, or are you seeing that there's fruitful conversation happening there? Like, are you optimistic about the work you're going to be able to do in that space?
I'm definitely optimistic. We have a very diverse council. Just to be frank, we have council members that are Black, we have council members that are gay. And
how many Jews are there in the city, just to give people a sense of the scale?
There's between 20 and 25%, and we have almost 15,000 residents. So, it's about a quarter, which is significant in terms of needs and things like that. We have a very large Catholic community as well, and then kind of a mix of everybody else. But I think that, number one, a lot of the residents don't. Well, let me go back for a second. I feel that the minorities understand the plight of what the Jews are going through much more, and they are much more sensitive than anyone else. So, and again, the two gay people that are on council, I have to tell you, they are the most supportive people on the city council that I've met, which is so interesting. You would never think
they can be allies.
You never think that. And the two Black members also, they have, and they are still going through, discrimination. So it's really interesting kind of how that pans out. It's not, all or nothing. There's definitely members that, probably just, residents that are not, or just citizens that are not. But I really see that minorities, if you could sit and talk to them, they will be your ally much faster than someone else.
But have you had to deal with the war in Gaza and, issues of Israel, Palestine? Like, are those quite prominent? Because some of the conversations that I've had in these interfaith gatherings, hearing from our Muslim colleagues, it has such an outsized space in the discourse in their community. And it's just bizarre, but that's the reality. Whether we assume it's anti-Semitic of origin, but it becomes such a huge issue.
So there's two cases in particular where I was friends with people and I saw something that they posted, which I was like flabbergasted that it was anti-Israel. And I asked them for coffee and I sat down, and honestly, they had no idea. So I think a lot of people are just parroting what other people are saying without understanding.
They don't know which river and which sea you're talking about.
Our city actually raised the Israeli flag for a number of months after October 7th. I have to be honest with you, I don't think I would have done that. And a lot of people are like, why, Michelle? I'm like, because first of all, I think that puts a target, number one. And number two is my kind of premise on anything with the city is we deal with city issues. We are not going to deal with other national or state issues, because that just leaves it on a level playing field, and no one can ever come back and say, oh, well, you did this but not this, and you did this but not this. You can make a statement, right? I can make a statement about that, but I really want to just make sure, and that's for everyone's safety and everyone's political beliefs as well. We only deal with city issues. And I think that
sounds very smart and savvy. I don't know whether you get training for this kind of role, but it sounds like you know how to handle it. I want to zoom out from your specific role to think now about leadership and to relate to Jewish women more broadly, and those kind of issues that I really try and interrogate on this podcast. I know that you've been involved in other areas of Jewish life, right outside of the political space. You've set up this charity called AMATZ, which is about Jewish educational leadership and educator development. And I understand that it supports Beis Yaakov schools, like the whole network of Beis Yaakov schools worldwide, which is really influential. So perhaps you could share with us what that work means to you and how involved you still are. What are you trying to achieve in that space?
Sure. So that's kind of my passion project. Almost 10 years ago, I went on a number of they're called Chizuk missions. Beerfeld is the one that organizes them to Israel. It's basically it's for women. It's basically seminary for women for a week. And I met these other two individuals, and one of them, kind of said at the end of one of the retreats that we need this for our schools, for our students. And me and another woman went up to her afterwards, and that's kind of how it got started. We all came from different. We all felt we wanted to do this for different reasons. There's a Hasidic woman, there's a woman from Flatbush, and there's me from Cleveland. And we really felt that the Beis Yaakov girls were graduating without a strong connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Jewish pride. And we wanted to change that. And our idea was kind of a trickle down way where you get to the principals, you can change the culture, you get to the teachers who can hit the students, right? Who can make sure that, they get what they need. So
do you mean to say that Beis Yaakov, relatively speaking, compared to other places, or do you see this as an issue that's endemic in terms of Jewish day schools generally? Because it's something we tried to tackle here in London, like in the UK, bringing teachers together so that they could tackle the question of spirituality. It's not an obvious thing. How do you bring God into the classroom? And there's all sorts of different strategies that people have developed, but I wouldn't have thought Beis Yaakov was the lowest of the schools with that.
So we had to start somewhere, and this is where we knew we could get in. So, we're three women. We have allies that we think can get into the boys' schools, which is on our strategic plan. We just haven't gotten there yet. But, first of all, we have so much hakaras hatov to these schools and to these principals and to the teachers because they have such a lofty job. But the way that we have been getting into them is really the foundation of 6 constant mitzvos, sheish mitzvos tamidiyos. We've made a curriculum on that. We really feel that if you can give the kids the foundation, come back to the foundation, stop. Obviously you need to have your chumash and your navi and this and that, but you really need to start with a God-centered curriculum, right? And sheish mitzvos really puts in the forefront Hashem, like every second of every day. If Hashem's the forefront of your mind, you're going to build that relationship with him. You're going to know that he loves you and, move forward from there. So
you've been able to work in like a centralized way to change the curricula of all the different schools, because that's always very challenging. I work with schools and I work with teachers, but it's not always easy to influence what happens inside the schools in terms of their curriculum.
Right. So we created this curriculum and we sell it to different schools. That we did kind of during COVID when you couldn't really meet in person anymore, right? Because we're kind of built on 4 pillars. The first one is we take principals to Eretz Israel. We have 2 professional development programs for principals and teachers throughout the year. We have our Sheish Mitzvos curriculum, and we also have a teacher stipend program where we have 30 foundational videos that the schools can bring in. It's on a USB, so the teachers can listen to them whenever they want, and that helps the teachers, relate to the students and give over what they need to give over properly. But yeah, it's very hard and it's slow, but we have the trust of these women now, and we see changes. And it's also a place which was a byproduct that women principals and teachers have never been given a platform where they could just be vulnerable and speak to other women. You have all these other organizations, but a lot of it, is concentrated with the men, and there's never just a place for the women to speak to each other and build that network. And that was kind of a really great byproduct that we created.
Yeah, it's really fascinating actually, because I run an organization where we're working in supporting teachers, and we have a lot of conferences and a lot of teacher training, but it is in a mixed setting, even though it really spans the spectrum of the community, doesn't really cater to Beis Yaakov at all because they probably would prefer to be in single sex spaces. But I'm often talking to colleagues in the States because there are not many day schools in the States where women have been able to become principal. And there seem to be more glass ceilings in education, perhaps not in Beis Yaakov because it's women for women type of thing, but certainly in co-ed schools, there are very few female principals, whereas in the UK, that's a glass ceiling that doesn't really exist. So it's interesting how there are different setups and slightly different issues in the community in different countries.
No, that is interesting. I also feel not in out of town schools. When I mean out of town, I mean not New York, but in
do you
New
count
York
yourself as
schools,
out of town?
in New York schools, a lot of the schools are owned. They're business. Out of town, they're nonprofits. So you don't have this kind of hierarchy that you have in some of the New York schools.
I also think it's to do with when you have religious authorities above the principal. So like in the UK, we often have these like religious authorities that are ultimately the backstop. So they're not as concerned in terms of the head of school, the female head of school being the ultimate halachic authority. There's something in the governance structure that feeds into that as well. But I'm often asked for advice by my US counterparts on that for the benefit of women. So given that you're involved as a board member and a founder of a non-profit, and you also, I don't know if you still do, but have been working as a CFO within a high school. So you have the professional in a day school, right? So you're still doing that, and you have the professional work in the community. You have your mayoral role, which is for the wider world, and you have the experience as a board member and founder within the Jewish community as well, which is a different type of hat. I think you have this really unique perspective in terms of looking at the impact that you can make in these different kind of roles. And I'm really fascinated, both personally and for the sake of this podcast, when we advise women and young women coming through, or women want to see how can they have the most impact on the Jewish world, what kind of roles should they take on. I myself have worked as a lawyer in the city, and then I took on a trustee role as a board member for a social care organization, and then coming into a professional Jewish role, I stopped working as a board member because I have my roster full for working from the inside. But I really want to explore with you and ask your views as to where you think you can have the most influence to benefit the community. Obviously, as a mayor, you're going to benefit lots of people, but perhaps with that platform, you're able to do more good for the community than you can do from the inside. So what do you think about this inside-outside kind of question?
So I really feel that Hashem has put us on this earth to make a difference. I really, truly feel that in my bones, and everybody can do that in a different way. And, some women might take exception to this, but I really feel that like when I said your family, make your family your priority first, I don't mean that lightly. Some women's target in this world is to make their family the best that they can possibly do and raise their children and support their husband. And that's not something to be taken lightly. A lot of people say, oh, I'm just a housewife. What? No, you're not. You're literally building Klal Yisrael. That's like huge. So, I really feel like it's a gift that I can manage a couple different things, but people should not take, their growing family as something that is subpar.
I'm really happy you raised that, actually, because I wouldn't want anyone to think that I would ever minimize that. And I really feel like that's something that I've appreciated more and more as I've, I suppose, developed in my career, but at the same time realized that my kids need me more and more, and try to take more of myself away from my career and towards my family. But, everyone does that in their own way. But I think it is a role of leadership, the most important one, really.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, everything that, I'm touching right now, does make that impact. I don't think it's like one thing. Again, like, I'm blessed that I can have my hands in a few different pots and try to make that small difference. But I think if a woman especially wants to do something, you have to go for it. And you know what? It's okay if you make mistakes. You can make iterations along the way. You learn from your mistakes. And you just grow as a person. So, you have to take that risk, or it's never going to happen. And failure is just part of growing. So, just because, maybe you failed once, that doesn't mean that's the end of your success. You learn from it and you move on.
Have you had experiences like that? Have you had a particular point where you feel like you've failed and you've really had to come back from that?
You know what, it's not something that you would think, but I would have loved to be, home with my kids and not having to work full time. I really have been working full time my whole married life, and it just, for whatever reason, didn't work out. But there were definitely things I think in my family life that I would have wanted to be a little bit more present, but I was working. So, I really made the best, I think, of the situation of any working mother. In terms of failure, it's, I don't know if there's one specific instance, but there's definitely times where I've learned, and I love when people are honest with me so I can learn from my mistakes. I have one confident, right now, I remember I sent out an email a few weeks ago, and this is just like a small tidbit of lots of things that could happen. Said, you know what, just, you have to realize going forward, you're the leader, and, it needs to be written X, Y, and Z, and that kind of how I wrote it. And I so appreciated that because I learned from it and I won't make that mistake again.
Yeah, I think that's quite empowering. And particularly as women, I think we're often quite consensual and not really willing to put ourselves out there in as blatant a way as might be needed. And I remember somebody saying that to me as well. Like, why am I always writing on my emails, we think this, or like, we are so happy that, why don't you just say I? If it's something you've done, like, there's no harm in that. And sometimes it's important that you're leading from the front. So,
Right.
yeah,
And
like
that's
there are
very hard
different
for
valid
me.
styles.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that imposter syndrome is real. And
Yeah.
it is the way that I lead is by inclusivity, right? Like I want to empower other people, and it's not about me, it's about you, right? A good leader surrounds surrounds themselves with people that are experts. And I really want to give them the credit, not just me, but if I can create a culture that empowers all of those other people, that's what's important to me.
Mhm. Yeah, sounds good. Do you have particular, like a nugget of wisdom? Like you've already shared a lot, but in terms of women who perhaps might want to get into politics, maybe even at an earlier stage in their careers, is there anything that you think that you would advise or warn or suggest?
Um, I do think that if you want to, get into that public arena, you just have to make sure that you are able to speak confidently and empathetically to all types of people. It's, again, Kiddush Hashem is the most important thing. And you need to be able to kind of transition back and forth between the non-Jewish world and the Jewish world. Um, and whether that means, maybe getting some more education or, just speaking to people and start meeting people. You can learn just from interpersonal contact as well.
Yeah, totally. I'd like to finish our conversation by broadening this out even further and trying to horizon scan, because I love to hear the views of my guests on Jewish women as leaders, particularly in the religious space. Obviously, you're part of a community, you have your own role models. Maybe you would like to share who they are, who they have been. But where do you see women as role models, as leaders in your community and in the Jewish world going forward? Say, looking 20 years, do you have a vision of what that should look like, could look like, what you'd like it to look like?
I definitely think that women have something to give that men might not necessarily, right? I mentioned multitasking before. I think just that sympathetic or empathetic personality that might be just more prominent in a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think organizational skills, just in general. Um, I I do think that women are excellent leaders in the from a community, especially like the more right wing where I am. You just have to make sure that like tznius is number one, right? Like you have to be humble. You need to do things in a tznius way where um and it's different. It's a fine line, right? Like when when I won this election, and then I don't know how, but one of the Jewish news medias picked it up, and my picture was like front and center. I was like, who put that out there? And I know my picture has to go places, but I'm not going to be the one that's going to be putting it out unnecessarily. Let's put it that way. I know my picture's there. I know some people don't agree with that. I just try to do everything sensitively and with obviously within the bounds of halacha. It's very important for me to be humble in this whole piece and tznius, but at the same time be able to express my views. And I know that's kind of not a great answer because it's very complicated. I'm always
No,
kind of
I hear
struggling,
that.
like what's the appropriate thing to do. So
I hear that. And I think humility and modesty and tzniut mean different things to different people. And that's a whole big topic. But, to me, you come across in a very, very tsanua manner. And that doesn't have to conflict in any way with your leadership. And I think kol hakavod for being able to be true to yourself and your values, but being a strong leader at the same time. I think it's an amazing accomplishment and, hatzlacha rabah for all that you're going to do. And thank you, because I think what you've really brought to me and I've really learned is like a different angle to what I often get in terms of this podcast. I always try and make them different and bring different voices, because the diversity of our Jewish world, the women in it, is super important to me. But I think that you have brought something different and like enlightening. And I think what you bring to the world of politics is like that voice of moderation and being able to be strong in your identity and really knowing who you are and not ashamed of that, like a proud Orthodox Jewish woman, but at the same time, really being able to reach out and across divides and listen to people and be empathetic. And I think, that's sorely needed in the politics of today. So really, I wish much hatzlacha. And I look forward to hearing great things about everything you're accomplishing in University Heights and beyond. And
thank you so much.
Michele Weiss for President of the United States. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to all our listeners. I'm always grateful for your suggestions, for your feedback, who you want to hear from, and for you to share our podcast with your friends and with your family. I really, really appreciate that to help us grow this amazing community that I loved so very much. So yes, and do, as ever, look at lsjs.ac.uk for our courses and programs that are happening. We've got some new things happening from this month, and also the second term of our year-long in-depth courses on Rabbi Sacks and the scholars. We've got the Rambam, we've got Tanakh through the prism of different characters, so you can pick that up from January as well. And enjoy your learning. And thank you again, Michele Weiss, Mayor of University Heights, for joining us on Women's Gallery.